before the scream is heard. There is always a wrongness. Not fear. Not yet. Something subtler. A pressure in the air. A heaviness that settles over the land like damp wool pulled across the face of the world. Night comes early in Ireland. And when it comes, it does not arrive gently. It seeps. It creeps. It fills the spaces between trees, between thoughts, between heartbeats. Animals sense it first. Dogs whimper and retreat to corners they do not normally choose. Horses stamp and refuse the reins. Birds vanish from the hedgerows as if erased. Even the insects go silent. This is not natural quiet. This is anticipation. And then, from somewhere that cannot be pointed to, from no fixed direction, no visible mouth, the scream begins. It does not burst into existence. It unfurls, like a wound slowly opening. The sound stretches across the landscape, thin and trembling at first, then swelling, layer upon layer, until it fills the night completely. It does not echo. It does not fade. It lingers. People who hear it rarely scream back. They freeze. Their bodies understand before their minds can catch up. This is not something to flee from. This is not something that can be chased away. This sound has already chosen them. The Banshee does not appear to everyone. Most who hear her never see her at all. And those who do wish they hadn't. Because the moment the scream is given a face, it becomes personal. Descriptions vary, but the emotions do not. Witnesses speak of an overwhelming sense of being watched by something that remembers you. Not just your name, but your blood. Your ancestors. The shape of your family tree stripped bare. Sometimes she is seen near water, washing something dark from cloth that never becomes clean. Sometimes she stands at the edge of a field, unmoving, her hair flowing unnaturally, as if underwater. Sometimes she is already inside the house, standing at the foot of the bed. Her eyes, when described at all, are the worst part. Not glowing. Not monstrous. Just old. Ancient. Heavy with knowledge no human should possess. To look into them is to feel judged, not morally, but historically. As if she is measuring how far your family has fallen since the days when she crowned kings and broke them just as easily. This is not hatred. This is disappointment. And grief. Grief so vast it has learned to scream. Long before she became a warning, she was a ruler. The goddesses of sovereignty did not beg worship. They enforced it. They were the land made flesh. To anger them was to invite crop failure, plague, invasion. To please them was to prosper. And she was among the most feared. She walked battlefields before they were soaked. She chose who would die gloriously, and who would be forgotten entirely. Her scream once signaled victory or annihilation. Then the world changed. Her temples crumbled. Her name fractured into whispers. Her authority was reframed as evil. Her power reduced to mourning. But power does not vanish. It rots. It festers. It becomes something else. The scream we hear today is not merely grief for the dying. It is grief for herself. For what she was forced to become. For the land that no longer listens. For the kings who no longer kneel. She cannot stop death. She can only announce it. And that may be the cruelest punishment of all. In family accounts, the aftermath is just as chilling as the scream itself. Once it ends, silence crashes down, thick and unnatural. No wind. No animals. Just the crackle of fire, and the sound of breathing that suddenly feels borrowed. People wait. Minutes stretch into hours. Sleep does not come. Every sound becomes suspicious. Every cough feels like a countdown. Every footstep inside the house sounds like it might be the last. Sometimes death follows within hours. Sometimes days. Sometimes weeks. But it always comes. And when it does, the scream is remembered with terrifying clarity. Not as a warning, but as confirmation that fate had already been sealed. The Banshee does not knock. She does not ask permission. She does not explain. She announces that the past has reached forward and claimed another name. And even now, in an age of electricity and disbelief, people still lower their voices when speaking of her, still refuse to whistle at night, still feel a chill when the wind sounds wrong. Because some things do not require belief to function. Some things simply remember you. This is only the beginning. There is a reason the old stories insist you never follow the sound. Not because you might get lost, but because you might be seen. The scream does not behave like noise. It behaves like a presence. It swells, contracts, presses inward, as if the night itself is breathing through and throat. Those who chased it believed they were hunters. They were wrong. They were approaching a boundary they were never meant to cross. Men ran across fields soaked in dew, boots slipping, lungs burning, convinced the next hedge, the next bend in the road, would reveal her. Instead, the sound folded around them. It slipped behind the eyes. It rang inside the skull. No matter where they turned, the scream was already there. West. East. Above. Below. Everywhere. Nowhere. This impossible direction stripped the listener of certainty. Space itself became unreliable. The house, once a place of safety, felt suddenly exposed, floating inside an ocean of sound. The scream did not pass through the walls. It claimed them. The cottage became a sealed chamber. A ritual space. A private arena where the living were forced into communion with something far older than fear. In that moment, the family was no longer part of the village. They were alone with their ancestry. Alone with the judgment of the land. And then, sometimes, she allowed herself to be seen. These manifestations were rare, and that rarity made them devastating. They occurred when the light itself was uncertain. When shadows still clung to objects that should have been solid. When the eye could not fully trust what it was reporting to the brain. Witnesses noticed her the way one notices a mistake. A shape that should not be there. Standing motionless by the river ford, water sliding silently past her feet as if refusing to touch her. Or hovering just beyond the garden gate, where cultivated soil gives way to wild growth. Always at borders. Always at thresholds. Because she belonged to either side anymore. But the most disturbing accounts, the ones that made people stop speaking mid-sentence, came from bedrooms. From the moment when someone woke suddenly, heart racing, convinced they were not alone. And then saw her. Her face pressed against the windowpane. So close that breath fogged the glass, though no one could agree whether it was her breath, or theirs. Eyes open. Unblinking. Watching. She did not scratch. She did not knock. She did not try to enter. She did not need to. She was already inside the house. Already inside the moment. In these encounters, the Banshee was never empty-handed. The silver comb appears again and again, glinting faintly even in near darkness. She ran it slowly through her hair, untangling strands that never seemed to end. Sometimes the sound of the teeth sliding through hair could be heard, soft, intimate, obscene in its closeness. This was not vanity. This was preparation. Hair, in ancient belief, carried power. Memory. Identity. To comb it was to order chaos. To prepare for ritual. To ready oneself for mourning that had already begun. And the comb itself. It was never tarnished. Never rusted. Always waiting. Those foolish enough to take one found in the night often reported illness, misfortune, death clinging to them like damp cloth. The comb did not belong to the living. It was a tool of transition. Her body, when fully seen, refused consistency. In one form, she was the hag of the mist. Small, crooked, wrapped in a grey cloak that seemed stitched from fog and old rain. Her skin sagged with age that could not be measured in years. Her eyes were raw, inflamed, permanently red, as if she had been crying since the beginning of memory. She looked less like a monster, and more like something broken beyond repair. This version inspired pity as much as terror. Witnesses spoke of overwhelming sadness, of wanting to look away not from fear, but from unbearable grief. Because this was what centuries of exile looked like. But in other accounts, the tone changes. The voice lowers. The fear sharpens. Because sometimes she was beautiful. Unnaturally so. Tall. Pale. Luminous in the half-light. Her hair fell in perfect waves, silver or black depending on the witness, framing a face untouched by age. Her eyes were deep, dark, and knowing. This was not decay. This was memory of power. To see her like this was not comforting. It was worse. Because beauty implied choice. Control. Intent. This was the goddess she had once been, bleeding through the mask forced upon her. And when she appeared this way, witnesses felt something far more dangerous than fear. They felt recognition. As if some ancient part of the human brain remembered kneeling. Both forms were true. Both were her. She was the past that could not die and the present that refused to forget. A ruler reduced to a mourner. A goddess punished with eternal awareness. She did not kill. She did not save. She watched. And she screamed so the land would remember what it had lost. When the scream finally ended, it did not fade gently. It stopped abruptly, like a cord cut. The silence that followed was worse. Thick. Heavy. Final. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now the waiting began. And everyone in the house knew. The Banshee had already chosen. She wears two faces. And neither offers mercy. One is rot. The other is remembrance. In her first form, she embodies the grave itself, the slow collapse of flesh, the ancient compression of generations pressed into soil. This is the Banshee as decay made visible. Her body appears small, twisted, wrong in subtle ways. Skin clings to bone as if reluctant to remain. Her posture bends inward, like something folding under the weight of centuries. This form does not rush. It waits. It smells of damp earth and old rain. Of stone that has outlived names. Of bloodlines so ancient they no longer remember their own beginnings. This is not simply age. This is lineage made heavy. Yet standing alongside this image, equally old and equally powerful, is another vision that unsettles in a different way. She is young. Radiantly, unnaturally beautiful. Taller than any mortal woman should be. Her presence distorts proportion, making doors seem smaller, ceilings lower, the human world suddenly inadequate. She is wrapped in white or silver, not as clothing but as a burial shroud that has learned to move. Her skin is pale, luminous, almost reflective in moonlight. Her hair flows freely, untouched by decay. Her face holds no distortion. Only sorrow. Crushing. Absolute. Endless. This duality is not contradiction. It is truth. She is death in its two eternal faces. The physical horror of what remains, and the tragic beauty of what is lost too soon. The corpse. And the memory. Both forms share the same unbearable demeanor. She does not rage. She does not threaten. She does not plead. She grieves. And her grief is catastrophic. But the scream is not her only language. Beyond the silver comb, beyond the grooming ritual that prepares her for mourning, there is another gesture that chills witnesses more deeply than the voice itself. The clapping of hands. Sharp. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Witnesses describe it with unease, palms striking together with controlled force, not frantic, not wild. Each clap lands like punctuation. Like a hammer sealing a coffin lid. This gesture is the visual twin of the keen. Where the scream tears through the air, the clapping measures it. In ancient human mourning, striking the hands together was an expression of finality, of despair so complete it required physical release. The Banshee did not invent this gesture. She remembered it. And in the supernatural context, it becomes something far worse. A ritual. Each clap marks the closing of a chapter. The sealing of a fate. The end of possibility. Her hands become percussion instruments accompanying her song, setting a tempo for the approaching death. The household does not hear time ticking. They hear it counting down. Interaction with her is governed by laws older than morality. She never comes too close. She never stays too far. Always within recognition. Always beyond reach. This distance is not hesitation. It is protocol. She stands at the edge of the domestic space, watching. Her gaze moves slowly across faces, lingering in ways that feel invasive, intimate, knowing. There is no hatred in her eyes. There is certainty. She does not cause the death. That is the most terrifying truth. She does not need to. Her presence confirms that the machinery of fate is already turning, that the future has been decided elsewhere, earlier, long before anyone noticed. She is not executioner. She is witness. And that is why she terrifies. Because you cannot bargain with someone who has no authority to intervene. She does not threaten. She acknowledges. She appears only after the moment of choice has passed. The death she announces has already happened. Just not yet in the present tense. Her voice obeys rules as strict as ritual law. The Banshee does not wail endlessly. She follows the rule of 3. 3 cries. Always 3. Each separated by long, suffocating silences that stretch the nerves thin. The pauses are not mercy. They are tactical. They allow the sound to settle into the land, into the walls, into the listener's thoughts. 1 cry might be imagination. 2 might be coincidence. 3 is decree. This tripartite structure mirrors the ancient obsession with the number 3, past, present, future. After the 3rd cry, doubt dies. Most encounters end there. With waiting. With fear. With silence. But folklore preserves darker stories, warnings wrapped in narrative. Stories of what happens when humans forget their place. The Banshee is passive only when respected. Mockery awakens something else. Drunkards shouting insults into the night. Skeptics laughing, daring her to show herself. Men who mistook ancient restraint for weakness and tried to chase her, corner her, capture her. They broke the rules. And the rules broke them. When provoked, the distance collapsed. The observer became the pursued. Stories tell of her moving with impossible speed, gliding rather than running, her scream transforming into something sharper, angrier. Offenders fled back toward their homes, toward thresholds that suddenly felt fragile. She followed. Not inside. Never inside. But close enough. Close enough to leave marks. These stories were not entertainment. They were instruction. A communal enforcement of respect. A warning that death's messengers do not tolerate ridicule. And in the most famous of these legends, the silver comb becomes a weapon. There are crimes in folklore that cannot be forgiven. Not sins. Not mistakes. Violations. And among the most dangerous of these is the theft of the silver comb. In the old accounts, it rarely begins with malice. A glint in the grass. A strange object left on a windowsill at dawn. Something beautiful where nothing should be. The comb looks harmless, delicate, cold, impossibly clean. It invites curiosity. And curiosity is enough. The moment a human takes the comb, the dynamic shifts. The passive observer awakens. The Banshee does not rage immediately. She does not strike from the shadows. Instead, she lays siege. The thief becomes aware of her presence before seeing her. A scream outside the house, closer than before. Not announcing death now, but demanding restitution. Night after night she follows. Never entering. Never leaving. Her shrieking circles the home like a tightening noose. The sound presses against walls, crawls along the roof, leaks through keyholes. Sleep becomes impossible. Sanity thins. The message is simple. Return what is mine. But folklore is mercilessly precise. There is a right way to return the comb. And a wrong one. Those foolish enough to approach her directly, arm extended, offering the comb hand to hand, are met with catastrophic punishment. Stories say she does not hesitate. She does not snarl or warn. She removes the arm. Not symbolically. Physically. Torn from the socket as easily as tearing cloth. This is not rage. It is correction. The proper protocol is colder. The human must remain inside the house. The boundary must be respected. The comb must be passed through the window, never the door, using iron tongs. Iron. The ancient enemy of the other world. The metal that wounds what cannot be killed. Only then will she approach. Her hand snaps out, fast as striking lightning, seizing the comb. And even in compliance, she leaves a mark. The iron tongs, symbols of human protection, return twisted, bent, sometimes sliced clean through. As if iron were soft clay. This detail appears again and again in the records. Not to frighten, but to remind. Beneath her mourning exterior lies immense strength. Power held in restraint. The encounter rarely ends cleanly. Even when the rules are followed, the witness is changed. Those who look too closely at her face, who linger too long on features not meant for human scrutiny, report immediate consequences. Hair turning white overnight. Not gray. White. As if time itself rushed to escape their scalp. Others complain of a ringing in the ears that never stops. A high, thin tone just below perception. A permanent echo of the scream lodged inside the nervous system. A reminder that sound can scar. Folklore is explicit about the boundary. The Banshee is meant to be heard. She is meant to be feared. She is never meant to be touched. She belongs to a class of dangerous divinity where proximity itself is poisonous. Where witnessing comes with a cost. Where curiosity extracts payment in flesh, memory, or time. And yet, her scream did not emerge in isolation. It has a mirror. A human echo. The terror of the Banshee's cry finds its earthly counterpart in one of the most misunderstood rituals in Irish history. The keening. To the modern ear, the keen sounds like chaos. Like hysteria. A formless explosion of grief, women screaming over the dead, tearing at themselves, voices breaking into something almost animal. But this is illusion. The keen was not madness. It was architecture. A rigorously structured vocal ritual designed to carry a community through trauma without shattering it. At its core, the keen functioned as a mnemonic device, a vessel for collective memory. It preserved names, deeds, bloodlines. It prevented the dead from slipping silently into oblivion. The ritual followed a precise structure. First came the goel, the raw, wordless wail. Pure sound. Unshaped grief. The same rising and falling cadence heard in the banshee's cry. Emotions stripped of language. Then came the magna. Improvised poetic verse. The keener named the dead. Traced genealogy. Catalogued virtues. Anchored the loss in narrative so it could be carried forward. Sound. Then meaning. At the center of this ritual stood the keening woman. She was not family. She was not grieving her own. She was a professional intermediary. While the household stood paralyzed by shock, unable to scream, unable to breathe, the keener entered and performed grief on their behalf. She absorbed the madness. She screamed so they would not have to. She rocked, tore at her hair, struck her body, wailed until her voice shredded. She became the lightning rod that drew chaos out of the room and grounded it into sound. By externalizing the horror, she gave the family permission to collapse, and later to recover. Her appearance during the ritual was no accident. In earlier Ireland, a woman's hair was bound and covered in public. Order. Modesty. Civilization. The keening woman broke this law deliberately. The moment the ritual began, she unbound her hair. Let it fall loose. Wild. Uncontained. This act was not symbolic. It was transformative. By adopting the wild hair of the otherworld, she stepped outside the laws of the living. She became something else. Something between village and grave. Between sanity and madness. She became a temporary banshee. A bridge. A human channel through which the supernatural could safely pass. And like the banshee herself, these women occupied a dangerous social position. Respected. Feared. Kept at a distance. Because anyone who walks too close to death too often does not return unchanged. The greatest keening women were not anonymous mourners. They were summoned. Their names traveled faster than death itself, whispered from parish to parish like the approach of a storm. When a great house fell silent, when an aristocratic bloodline lost one of its pillars, messengers were sent out, not for doctors, not for priests alone, but for her. The keener. She did not come cheaply. Her fee reflected the danger of her work. And everyone understood why. The most accomplished keening women commanded immense respect. They moved between parishes like sanctioned outcasts, officiating funerals of the powerful, the old families, the names that still carried weight in the land. When she entered a wake house, conversation died instantly. Not out of courtesy. Out of instinct. Because she brought death with her, not the corpse, but the sound of it. Yet for all their importance, keening women lived on the edge of acceptable society. They were necessary. And they were feared. Their ability to summon raw, terrifying emotion on command unsettled priests and landowners alike. Civilization depends on control, of the body, of the voice, of grief itself. And the keener shattered that control the moment she opened her mouth. She possessed a tragic authority. A power earned through intimacy with the biological truths polite society pretended did not exist. Like the executioner, who knew how flesh failed. Like the midwife, who stood between life and death with blood on her hands. The keening woman handled what others could not bear to look at. And so she was honored. And kept at arm's length. The keen itself was never improvised chaos. It was weaponized memory. In a culture where written records were broken, burned, or never kept at all, the keening woman served as the oral historian of the bloodline. Her voice preserved what parchment could not. As she rocked and wailed, her verses stitched the deceased back into history. She named fathers, grandfathers, Ancestors whose deeds hovered somewhere between fact and myth. Warriors. Leaders. Landholders whose bones lay beneath the same soil. This was not nostalgia. This was continuity. She ensured the dead man was not reduced to a body in the ground, but elevated into a link in an unbroken chain. His identity survived because she spoke it aloud. And in doing so, she reminded the living who they were. But the keener's authority went further. She possessed a license no one else dared claim. She could speak truth without consequence. Within the keen, rules dissolved. Politeness died. Restraint vanished. The keening woman could curse enemies by name, condemn landlords, damn soldiers, accuse famine, eviction, and injustice without fear of reprisal. What could be punished in daylight became sacred in mourning. In her mouth, grief transformed into accusation. The funeral became a courtroom. The keen became a political weapon, a public validation of suffering, a ritualized scream against forces too powerful to confront directly. In this way, the death of one man became an act of resistance, a reaffirmation of local sovereignty, a refusal to be erased quietly. And here, the parallels with the Banshee become impossible to ignore. Both are solitary women. Both stand apart from family. Both announce the transition of a soul. Both wield sound as a boundary marker, defining who belongs to the community of the living, and who has crossed beyond it. Anthropologists argue that the Banshee is not merely a spirit, but an archetype. A supernatural projection of the keening woman herself. The human ritual cast outward onto the landscape, where it became eternal. When the keener wailed, she was not imitating madness. She was participating in a divine echo, aligning her voice with the frequency of the goddess still watching from the burial mound. And this alignment was dangerous, because the boundary between ritual and revelation was never secure. In the mental map of the old countryside, keening was more than mourning. It was a signal, a sonic beacon bridging worlds. Folklore speaks in hushed tones of wakes where something went wrong, where the sound changed. Mourners reported a voice joining the chorus, one too powerful, too resonant, too wrong to belong to any human throat. A note that rattled windows, shattered glass, made candle flames whip violently sideways. A sound that did not need introduction. The room would fall silent, because everyone understood. The keening woman had been heard, and something else had answered. The Banshee had come to witness her own reflection. When the keen reached its highest pitch, the invitation was already sent. No words were spoken. No prayer was required. The song itself was enough. The Banshee heard it. And she came. Not as an intruder, but as a mourner answering the call. This convergence terrified communities more than death itself. Because when the supernatural accepted the keen, it meant the ritual had crossed a threshold. The human voice had aligned too perfectly with the frequency of the other world. The goddess had recognized her own reflection. This created a deep, unspoken anxiety around the keening woman. The village needed her, but they did not trust her. A woman who could channel the voice of the mound so precisely risked becoming contaminated by it. Prolonged exposure to death altered her. Not metaphorically. Visibly. Legends persist of keeners who fell into black trances mid-ritual. Their bodies stiffened. Their eyes rolled back until only white showed. Their voices dropped, or rose, into a pitch no human throat should sustain. And then, the sound changed. Not louder, not wilder, but identical. Witnesses swore the cry that came from her mouth was no longer hers. It was the exact pitch, cadence, and emotional texture of the Banshee's scream. a biological instrument played by something ancient and unseen. The ritual granted her temporary diplomatic immunity in the land of the dead. But immunity expires. When the wake ended, she returned to the village marked, whispered about, watched, avoided in certain ways that could not be explained aloud. She had gone too far. She had come too close. And closeness always leaves residue. The power of the keen carried a specific danger known in folklore as the tether. Irish tradition imposed strict limits on grief, not out of cruelty, but necessity. The keen was meant to guide the soul away from the body, to loosen its grip, to show it the path outward. But grief can be possessive. And an excessive keen, a prolonged, desperate wail, could reverse the ritual's effect. Instead of releasing the spirit, it anchored it, held it inside the house, trapped between rooms, between breaths, between sobs. A ghost born not of malice, but of love that refused to let go. In this delicate balance, the Banshee served as regulator. Her scream marked the finality of departure. When she fell silent, the ritual was over. The soul had moved on. If the family continued to wail after that silence, if they refused to stop, they risked violating the natural order. Their grief became a gravitational force, dragging the dead back into the domestic sphere. The Banshee's silence was not absence. It was command. Release them. This hierarchy reveals the true structure of mourning. The keening woman performed for the living, but the Banshee mourned for the dead. The human woman imitated the goddess not to replace her, but to borrow a fraction of her authority. By dressing like her, sounding like her, moving like her. This was sympathetic magic. By transforming biological death into supernatural drama, the keener elevated the deceased beyond rot and decay. She made the death important enough to attract divine grief. The message was clear. This life mattered. Even the gods are crying. The cost of this mimicry was severe. Keeners often required days, sometimes weeks, to recover. Locals called it grief sickness. A hollowed-out exhaustion that sleep could not fix. Trembling hands. Hoarse voices. Eyes that struggled to focus. This was not physical fatigue alone. It was spiritual depletion. To simulate the Banshee's despair, the keener had to step into a psychological space of total loss, to touch the edge of the void and return. Not everyone returned cleanly. In this sense, the keening woman was a sacrificial figure. She absorbed the poison of death so the family could survive it. Just as the Banshee absorbed the loss of the lineage into the land itself. One flesh. One spirit. Two mirrors. Bound by the burden of the scream. And yet, the Banshee did not cry for everyone. She operated under a ruthless code of supernatural elitism. Unlike common ghosts or poltergeists, who might plague any house, the Banshee was exclusive. Her attention was reserved for the ancient aristocracy of Ireland. The old blood. Folklore sealed this exclusivity in rhyme. Families bearing the prefixes O and Mac. The Milesian lines. The original Gaelic nobility. To be haunted by a Banshee was not just terror. It was proof. A perverse status symbol. Her scream confirmed purity of lineage, unbroken, indigenous, untouched by Viking, Norman, or English blood. She was loyal not to land deeds, but to DNA. In the political devastation of 17th and 18th century Ireland, this mattered. Lands were seized. Castles confiscated. Titles erased by foreign law. Chieftains reduced to tenants on soil their ancestors once ruled. But the Banshee could not be taken. She remembered rank when paperwork did not. The great O'Neill clan spoke of their own ancestral spirit, Maine, who attended their line regardless of wealth or ruin. She followed blood, not bank accounts. A man could lose everything. Except her. This reframes the Banshee entirely. She is not a ghost. She is a collective external soul. A living archive. A spiritual hard drive storing the memory of every ancestor who ever bore the name. When she screams, she is not mourning one dying body. She is mourning attrition. The thinning of the tribe. The mother of the bloodline watching another child return to earth. This explains the intimacy. She is not breaking in. She is coming home. And this is why folklore denies her utterly to the planter stock, the families who arrived later. Any claim of a banshee among them was treated as fraud. A desperate attempt to purchase antiquity through myth. The banshee does not answer aspiration. She answers origin. Her loyalty is biological. Feral. Absolute. She follows true Gaelic blood with the devotion of a wolf pack. If one of her people dies alone, in a ditch, in poverty, unmarked, she is still there, screaming into the dark. Because blood is never forgotten. If a usurper died in a silk bed, the night remained silent. No cry. No warning. No witness. The gods did not come for thieves. This silence carved a brutal line through Irish memory. It reinforced a cultural partition so deep it became instinctual. The terror of the banshee was not universal. It was selective. And that selectivity bound the defeated native clans together in the dark like survivors of a shared catastrophe. To fear her was to belong. And here lies the paradox at the heart of the legend. The most horrifying sound in the Irish landscape. The scream that froze blood and shattered sleep. Also carried comfort. A grim, terrible comfort. Because her cry meant that the dead were not alone. It meant they belonged to something older than conquest. Older than paperwork. Older than borders and crowns. When she screamed, she confirmed that the dying person was still claimed by an ancient order that no empire could erase. Her wail was a final act of defiance. Even in death, the O and the Mac commanded the attention of the gods. The banshee was the keeper of the covenant. A contract written in blood, not ink. A family might lose land, lose language, lose power, lose name. But they would never lose the dignity of their own doom. She guaranteed that much. Then came the ultimate test. The Great Hunger. The famine did not just starve bodies. It dismembered a civilization. Entire villages emptied. Millions fled westward across black water, packed into coffin ships that smelled of rot and desperation. As the Irish poured into the Americas, Australia, and Britain, a question rose quietly among them, heavy with dread. Would she follow? The fairy woman of the mound was tied to place. To burial hills. To sacred soil. To specific rivers and stones. Surely she would remain behind. Surely the ocean would sever the bond. It did not. The folklore archives are unambiguous. The banshee was portable. She boarded the ships. She detached herself from the ancient tumuli and became nomadic, proving that blood mattered more than earth. The covenant did not belong to geography. It belonged to lineage. Oral histories from the diaspora described the migration in hushed detail. A grey crow perched on the rigging as ships left Cove or Galway. A bird that did not fly back as the coastline vanished. A presence that refused to be shaken off. Others described something worse. A sound. A wail rising above Atlantic storms, threading itself through the roar of waves and wind. A cry that did not belong to the sea, but traveled it effortlessly. The banshee followed in the ship's wake. In that moment, she changed. She ceased to be merely a spirit of place. She became a spirit of a people. The Atlantic Ocean was not a boundary. It was a road. A wet, heaving road connecting scattered fragments of a broken clan. In the New World, she adapted. She had to. The open bogs of Munster gave way to brick canyons and iron skeletons. Cities screamed constantly. Steam whistles. Streetcars. Factories grinding night and day. Noise drowned out memory. But not her. In Boston, New York, Liverpool, Irish immigrants told the same story. The familiar keen cutting cleanly through industrial chaos. Rising above clattering rails and shrieking machinery with impossible clarity. Men in Lowell heard her above the looms. Families in Hell's Kitchen heard her above the trains. The sound never lost its edge. The tenement walls offered no shelter. Fire escapes did not block her. She navigated the vertical labyrinth of the modern city with the same precision she once used in open fields. She found the right floor. The right window. The right family. Every time. For the witness, the effect was devastating. In Ireland, she belonged. She harmonized with ruins and wind and rain. In America, she was an anomaly. A rupture. An eruption of the ancient past into fluorescent modernity. To see her on a fire escape or outside a factory window was to realize that assimilation was an illusion. You could change clothes. Change language. Change allegiance. But not blood. In the hour of death, the Banshee ensured that you remained Irish. The phenomenon did not stop there. It followed the empire outward. In the Australian bush, settlers mistook the cry for dingoes or curlews, until they heard the rhythm. The unmistakable rise and fall of human grief embedded inside the sound. In Canada's wilderness, she adapted again. Her voice carried across frozen forests, bending to alien acoustics without losing its core identity. Across hemispheres. Across oceans. Across centuries. She tracked the bloodline. Relentless. Faithful. The Banshee does not haunt houses. She haunts inheritance. She is the scream of continuity in a world built on forgetting. And no matter how far the clan scatters, she finds them. In exile, she became something else entirely. Not a warning. Not a herald. But a companion. The ultimate companion of the displaced. The one piece of home that required no luggage, no papers, no ticket. She crossed oceans without effort. She slipped through borders unnoticed. She followed blood where maps failed. For the Irish exile, she was proof that separation was never complete. But something changed when she crossed the water. In Ireland, the Banshee announced your death. Abroad, she often announced the death of someone you loved. Someone you would never see again. This shift is subtle and devastating. In immigrant folklore, it appears again and again like a bruise pressed too many times to ignore. A daughter in Boston wakes screaming in the night, heart racing, ears ringing, the keen still vibrating in her bones. Weeks later, a letter arrives by ship. Her mother died in County Cork at the exact hour of the scream. A laborer in New York hears the cry while walking home from the docks. He collapses, shaking, certain it means him. It doesn't. It means his brother. Back home. Already buried. The Banshee became a supernatural telegraph. A messenger that moved faster than steamships and faster than ink. She collapsed the Atlantic into a single breath. She ensured that grief arrived on time, regardless of distance. The body might be separated. But the shock, the moment, the tearing realization, remained synchronized. The clan's emotional nervous system stayed intact. And beyond warning, the diaspora Banshee took on another role. One born of the immigrant's greatest terror. Not poverty. Not hunger. But this. To die on foreign soil. To rot beneath strange earth. To be buried where no ancestor lay. For the Irish abroad, this fear was unbearable. But when the Banshee appeared at a deathbed in New York, or Sydney, or Liverpool, she brought reassurance. Her presence meant the soul was not abandoned. She had come to retrieve it. She was no longer just a mourner. She was a psychopomp. A guide. A farrier of spirits. Her arrival suggested that while the body might rest in the Bronx, the soul would not. It would be shepherded home, across water, across memory, back to the ancestral hills. Back to Ben Bulben. Back to the people who remembered its name. But if this version of the Banshee feels almost merciful, the older layers of folklore strip that mercy away. Beneath the Victorian image of a pale, sorrowful lady of the manor lies something far older, far wetter, far more grotesque. The bean nigh. The washerwoman. And she is not romantic. Here, the Banshee abandons the threshold. No windows. No garden gates. No houses at all. She retreats into wilderness. To the ford. The shallow crossing of a river. A place where travelers must slow down. Where footing is uncertain. Where mistakes are easy. This shift in geography signals a shift in purpose. The washerwoman does not mourn death. She prepares for it. She is not a singer. She is a technician. Engaged in labor that must be completed before the body grows cold. The sound changes first. The familiar melodic wail is gone. In its place, work. A repetitive, wet, percussive sound. Cloths slapping against stone. Again. And again. And again. Folklore describes it as a flail striking a threshing floor. Or two heavy books slammed together with deliberate force. This is beetling, the old method of washing clothes. And it never stops. This sound is not frightening at first. That is the danger. It is domestic. Familiar. A sound that belongs to daylight. To women's hands. To normal life. But here it echoes in total darkness. At midnight. In places where no one should be working. It draws travelers from the road. Lures them closer. Makes them lean forward, lantern raised, trying to understand who would be washing clothes at such an hour. And then they see her. She is nothing like a ghost. Scottish and Northern Irish accounts describe something wrongly alive. Small, often child-sized, but massively built. Broad. Powerful. Her body is squat and muscular, as if shaped for labor rather than grace. Her face breaks human symmetry. She has only one nostril. A mark of the other world. Her teeth protrude unnaturally, yellow and blunt. Her feet are large and webbed, stained a deep, alarming red. Not painted. Stained. The color of blood that will not wash out. She wears green. Not white. Not shrouds. The green of the fairy host. The color of moss, algae, rot. She is not a ghost. She is elemental. Woven from river mud and old violence. The clothes she washes are not random. They are shrouds. Uniforms. Clothes belonging to those who have not yet died. The blood soaking them is fresh. Warm. Waiting. To witness the washerwoman is to realize death is not approaching. It is already scheduled. And the work has begun. The ford is not a place. It is a failure of geography. In Celtic cosmology, the ford exists where certainty breaks down. Either bank claims it. May the world owns it. It is a slit in reality, a wound where the membrane between the mortal realm and the other world grows thin enough to breathe through. Roads hesitate there. Footsteps slow. Animals refuse to cross. It is where things change state. And that is why she waits there. By taking the ford as her station, the washerwoman controls transition itself. She does not roam. She does not wander. She anchors herself at the crossing and turns it into a checkpoint. Anyone who passes must pay attention. Anyone who ignores her does so at their own cost. This aligns perfectly with her function as a death omen, not as a messenger, but as a gatekeeper. She stands where life becomes something else, where the road divides into before and after. She washes at the threshold because that is where the evidence accumulates. The being nigh is not passive grief. She is activity. Where the traditional banshee cries after fate is sealed, the washer works before the event manifests in the human world. Her labor is not symbolic. It is preparatory. She does not mourn the dead. She prepares them. In this older stratum of belief, death is not an accident. It is logistics. And the washerwoman is the grim quartermaster of the gods. Her scrubbing is not futile. It is causal. The act of washing the clothes functions as sympathetic magic of the most brutal kind. As she beats phantom blood from a spectral tunic, she creates the conditions for real blood to be spilled. As the river runs red in vision, it forecasts the red that will soon soak the ground. She is not cleaning history. She is writing it. The true horror of the encounter lies not in her form, but in what she washes. Any traveler who approaches the ford is drawn, irresistibly, to the garments. The human eye cannot help itself. It seeks pattern, identity, recognition. And folklore is mercilessly specific. These are not random clothes. Not generic shrouds. They are familiar. A tunic recognized instantly. A cloak worn daily. A shirt stitched by a wife's uneven hand. And in the most unbearable accounts, they belong to the witness himself. The washer lifts the fabric from the water. It drips. Not darkened. Not old. But bright. Fresh blood, arterial red, spilling back into the stream, staining the current downstream like a ribbon of violence. And the man on the bank, the living man, realizes he is wearing the same shirt. Clean. Dry. Still warm from his body. This is the paradox that breaks the mind. The washerwoman operates in a state of future-present simultaneity. She perceives events that have not yet occurred as already complete. To her ancient vision, the violence is not impending. It is finished. The man standing before her is already a corpse. His clothes are already stiff with gore. She washes them not to save him, but to prepare him. She washes the shroud before the heart has stopped. Time collapses. Cause and effect lose meaning. From the moment the man sees his own garment in her hands, his remaining hours are ceremonial. He is no longer fully alive. Alive by human law. Dead by otherworld jurisdiction. And the washerwoman does not acknowledge him. She does not look up. She does not threaten. She continues working. Because for her, the outcome is already filed. The scale of her labor speaks volumes. Where the banshee's cry may announce a single death, the washerwoman often appears before mass violence. Battles. Clan skirmishes. Raids that have not yet begun. In these accounts, she is not washing one garment, but piles. Armor stacked beside her like cairn stones. Tunics layered, sodden, heavy. The river choked with blood so thick it slows the current. This image served as intelligence. A warning not meant to be misunderstood. If a chieftain saw her washing garments marked with his clan's colors, his crest, his tartan, he knew the truth immediately. The battle was already lost. No strategy could undo it. No prayer could reroute it. The washerwoman had already completed her inventory. Veterans claimed you could estimate the casualty count by the depth of the red water downstream. The river itself became a ledger. And the garments? They were precise. Folklore from the Highlands emphasizes this cruelty. The clothes often bore the unmistakable errors of domestic manufacture. A crooked seam. A patched elbow. A stitch only a mother would make. There was no room for denial. No hope of mistaken identity. This was forensic certainty. The washerwoman knew the weave of the cloth. Which implies something far worse. She had been watching. Every morning. Every night. Waiting. The moment the fabric would fulfill its purpose. This transforms the encounter from a supernatural scare into a psychological execution. The victim is forced to confront proof of his own death while still breathing. He is allowed to walk away. But only as a condemned man carrying his sentence inside him. The banshee's cry evokes sorrow. It prepares the heart for loss. The washerwoman evokes something colder. Something terminal. She does not invite mourning. She delivers certainty. And certainty is far more terrifying than grief. The sight of the bloody laundry did not inspire poetry. It inspired nausea. A deep, instinctive revulsion that bypassed belief and struck the body first. The washer's work dragged the imagination downward, away from heaven, away from souls and judgment, into the meat of dying. This was not spiritual death. This was physical ruin. Torn muscle. Split skin. Blood pouring out where it was never meant to be seen. The Banshee had no interest in salvation. She did not care where the soul went. She cared about what was left behind. Her concern was the mess. The blood soaking into soil. The organs cooling in the open air. The biological debt that had to be paid. She represented the earth claiming what it was owed. The river running red was not symbolism. It was accounting. The life force spilled back into the land, recycled without sentiment. Individual consciousness meant nothing at this scale. The land did not grieve. It consumed. This is where the washerwoman connects back to the deepest roots of the myth, back past cottages and wakes and into the Iron Age. She is the Banshee stripped of mercy. She is the sovereignty goddess in her most ancient form. The battle crow. In the old sagas, the goddess did not appear to kings to comfort them. She came to dismiss them. To announce that their contract with the land had expired. When she washed a king's armor before battle, it was not prophecy. It was termination. By scrubbing death gore from the garments in advance, she was withdrawing her protection. Declaring the ruler obsolete. Preparing the ground for someone else. The land had rejected him. This act reframes the washer's labor entirely. She is not responding to fate. She is executing it. Her washing is not aftermath. It is authorization. The king failed. Or his time ended. And the goddess was erasing his imprint from the world. Notice something crucial. The Banshee is never idle. She never waits. She is always working. Bent over stones. Arms straining. Hands raw. Sweating. This matters. Because it reveals how ancient Ireland understood death. Not as sleep. Not as peace. But as labor. Hard, grinding, industrial work. The destiny of a clan required maintenance. The blood had to be washed. The shrouds prepared. The cycle greased and kept moving. The other world was not a paradise. It was a processing facility. And the gods were not resting. They were on shift. This makes the omen unbearable. Because there is no pause button. No mercy window. The work has already begun. The presence of blood on the shirt in the future means the wound is inevitable in the present. The accident, the blade, the fall, these are details. The outcome is already logged. The washer does not offer riddles. She offers documentation. And documentation cannot be argued with. To the Celtic mind, this was the ultimate terror. Not pain, but inevitability. The idea that free will is cosmetic. That the body is merely a container waiting for its scheduled breach. That the cleanup crew has already clocked in before the disaster even happens. This is not fear. This is determinism. And yet, there is one crack. One loophole. One suicidal gamble whispered in folklore for those desperate enough to try. Unlike the classic Banshee, distant, untouchable, purely acoustic, the washerwoman is solid. She has mass. She occupies space. And that means she can be trapped. If a traveler could approach the ford in absolute silence, if he could step between the washer and the water before she noticed him, the balance inverted instantly. By cutting off her retreat to the river, the source of her power, the human pinned the spirit into physical law. She could not flee. She could not vanish. She was forced to negotiate. But the price of this negotiation was obscene. The ritual is called the fosterage of the breast. It is not metaphor. It is not symbolic. It is biological. The human must seize the washer and demand to be taken as her foster child. In the oldest versions of the tale, he must physically suckle from her long, withered breast. Milk from the other world. Cold. Metallic. Foul. This act forges an unbreakable legal bond under Celtic law. Fosterage was sacred. Irrevocable. By consuming her milk, the human transforms the death hag into a foster mother. The predator becomes kin. Bound by this law, the being-nigh must stop her work. She must comply. She grants the traditional reward. 3 wishes. But listen closely to what is asked. Not gold. Not immortality. Not escape. They ask for information. Names of the dead before the battle begins. The outcome of the war. The exact hour of their own death. The washerwoman becomes a tactical engine. A living casualty report. Capturing her does not erase fate. It lets the warrior read it in advance. Strategy can be adjusted. Fear can be managed. Illusion can be discarded. But understand this. Even when successful, fate is rarely overturned. Only clarified. And the consequences of failure, of mistiming the approach, of slipping on wet stone, of being noticed too soon, are not poetic. They are not symbolic. They are physical. And final. Because when the washer looks up, she does not scream. She does not warn. She simply resumes her work. And soon, your clothes are in the river. If the washerwoman saw you first, it was already over. If a boot scraped stone, if a twig snapped, if breath caught too loudly in the throat, she did not scream. She struck. The wooden beetle, her washing bat, came down hard against the river's surface. And the river answered. The water did not splash randomly. It leapt. A precise arc of cold black liquid lashed against the intruder's legs, climbing the flesh like something alive. This was no accident of movement. It was a sentence carried by water. The curse was known as the wetting of the legs. Wherever the water touched, life collapsed. Muscle withered. Nerves died. Limbs stiffened into useless weight. Some men fell instantly. Others limped away screaming, only to realize days later that the damage was permanent. Crippled. Marked. Living proof that they had tried to outwit fate. And failed. This maiming was not cruelty. It was instruction. A brand burned into flesh declaring, You do not cross this boundary and leave unchanged. This dynamic reaches back into the oldest sovereignty myths of the Iron Age. In those stories, the future king is tested by a hag at the edge of society. She is filthy, grotesque, sexually demanding. She asks for intimacy, sometimes a kiss, sometimes more. If the hero recoils, he fails. If he accepts the horror, she transforms, revealing herself as the radiant goddess of the land. Power is granted only to those willing to embrace decay. The washerwoman preserves this initiation in corrupted form. The hero must confront death not abstractly, but physically. Must kneel in the mud. Must accept the ugliness of endings. Must even, at the deepest level, suckle at the breast of death itself. Wisdom is purchased with revulsion. Survival with humility. This is the Celtic law. True power comes only through intimacy with the dark machinery of nature. The most famous encounter in the mythology belongs to the hero Cuchulainn. Riding toward his final battle, he sees her at the ford. Not washing random armor. Washing his. He does not rush her. He does not challenge her. He does not beg. He recognizes her. And in that recognition, his journey ends. The washer does not kill him. She does not need to. Her labor is the punctuation mark. The final period at the end of a sentence already written. Even those who successfully forced a bargain from her rarely benefited. Her knowledge was precise, but merciless. She could tell a man when he would die, not how to stop it. A warrior told he would die beside a lake spent his life avoiding water, shrinking his world until the prophecy ruled every decision. Fate did not chase him. He carried it. The washer taught a brutal truth. Knowing the future does not grant control. It grants weight. And now, to understand who the Banshee truly is, we must abandon the Victorian ghost entirely. We must excavate her name. In Irish, Banshee does not mean ghost. It means woman of the fairy mound. And the mound is not metaphor. These are not whimsical hills. They are tombs. Ancient Neolithic structures older than Stonehenge. Massive engineered hills of stone and clay, passage graves that dominate the Irish landscape. These are not ruins. They are residences. The Banshee does not drift on the wind. She emerges. From the hollow earth. From chambers packed with ancestral bone. From a world beneath the world. The inhabitants of these mounds predate the families she haunts. In the Book of Invasions, these places become the refuge of the Tuatha De Danann, the old gods of Ireland. A race of luminous, high magical beings who ruled the island before humans arrived. When the mortal Milesians conquered the land, the gods did not vanish. They negotiated. A treaty was struck. Humans took the surface. The gods took below. They retreated into the ancient mounds and established a parallel civilization underground. Hidden. Compressed. Eternal. The fairy folk were not sprites. They were displaced deities. This reframes everything. The Banshee is not a ghost of the dead. She is a survivor. A woman of the Tuatha De Danann, diminished by time and belief, reduced to folklore, but not erased. Her magic is simply the residue of divine technology remembered by peasants as sorcery. When she appears to the Owen Mac families, the descendants of the conquerors, she becomes something extraordinary. A bridge. Between the upper world and the lower. Between human bloodlines and the gods they displaced. She remembers the treaty. She enforces it. She ensures that even as history erases power, memory does not erase reckoning. She does not scream because she hates. She screams because she remembers. And memory is heavier than vengeance. She is not an intruder. She is the neighbor. The ancient neighbor who lives beneath the floorboards of reality, who comes up from the basement of the world to knock softly on the door and warn the tenants that something is about to end. The Banshee does not invade history. She survives it. Her transformation, from goddess to fairy woman, from ruler to herald, is a textbook example of mythological erosion. A slow grinding down process scholars call euhemerization, the reduction of gods into legends, legends into folklore, folklore into children's stories. Over centuries of Christian dominance, the terrifying majesty of the old gods could not be openly acknowledged, but it could not be erased either. The Church reclassified them. They were no longer gods. They became fallen angels, fairies, spirits, things almost harmless. This was not mercy. It was containment. The Banshee is the clearest casualty of this demotion. She retains prophecy. She retains terror. She retains memory. But she has lost sovereignty. She no longer rules the land. She haunts those who do. Her scream is the echo of authority stripped away. And yet, she still wears the colors of divinity. Folklore describes her clothed not in mortal tones, but in the palette of the otherworld, brilliant white, deep green, violent red. These are not aesthetic choices. They are signals. In Celtic mythology, animals marked white with red ears are creatures of the sea, supernatural livestock belonging to the gods. The washerwoman's red webbed feet, the banshee's inflamed red eyes, function the same way. Color-coded proof. This being does not belong here. Her size tells the same story. Again and again, witnesses describe her as too tall, towering over men, too perfect in proportion, too much presence for a human frame. This echoes ancient descriptions of the old gods themselves, physically flawless, larger-than-life survivors of a golden age. She has shrunk in power, but not in stature. The final key to her psychology lies beneath the earth. The fairy mounds are not playgrounds. They are tombs, repositories of bone and memory. By dwelling inside them, the Banshee assumes her final role. The ancestral mother? She is not one woman. She is all of them. Every mother, grandmother, and matriarch who ever fed the clan, buried the clan, and sang the clan's dead into the ground. When she screams, she speaks with many mouths. This is why her cry feels the way it does. It is not hatred. It is not malice. It is maternal grief. The sound of the great mother losing yet another child to the soil. Again. And again. And again. This ancestral function explains her territorial specificity. The Banshee does not wander randomly. She is anchored to places where bloodlines took root. Many great Irish families are bound to specific landscapes, and to specific mounds. In these regions, the Banshee is not anonymous. She has a name. Ivel. Cleodna. Ain. These are not generic spirits. They are local goddesses. Tutelary intelligences who watched over specific territories for millennia. They entered into marriage contracts with land and ruler alike. The word Banshee is just a title, a job description. And the job was sovereignty. The survival of her myth into the modern era is not accidental. While temples were burned and rites outlawed, the mounds remained. You could erase scripture. You could not erase stone. As long as massive earthen monuments rose from the fields, the woman who lived inside them remained plausible. Her home was immune to theology, built from earth itself. She endured because the land remembered her even when people pretended not to. This brings us to the core doctrine of ancient Irish paganism: sovereignty. In the Celtic worldview, Ireland was not a possession. It was a being. Female. Conscious. alive. The final key to her psychology lies beneath the earth. The fairy mounds are not playgrounds. They are tombs, repositories of bone and memory. By dwelling inside them, the Banshee assumes her final role. The ancestral mother? She is not one woman. She is all of them. Every mother, grandmother, and matriarch who ever fed the clan, buried the clan, and sang the clan's dead into the ground. When she screams, she speaks with many mouths. This is why her cry feels the way it does. It is not hatred. It is not malice. It is maternal grief. The sound of the great mother losing yet another child to the soil. Again. And again. And again. This ancestral function explains her territorial specificity. The Banshee does not wander randomly. She is anchored to places where bloodlines took root. Many great Irish families are bound to specific landscapes, and to specific mounds. In these regions, the Banshee is not anonymous. She has a name. Ivel. Cleodna. Ain. These are not generic spirits. They are local goddesses. Tutelary intelligences who watched over specific territories for millennia. They entered into marriage contracts with land and ruler alike. The word Banshee is just a title, a job description. And the job was sovereignty. The survival of her myth into the modern era is not accidental. While temples were burned and rites outlawed, the mounds remained. You could erase scripture. You could not erase stone. As long as massive earthen monuments rose from the fields, the woman who lived inside them remained plausible. Her home was immune to theology. Built from earth itself. She endured because the land remembered her even when people pretended not to. This brings us to the core doctrine of ancient Irish paganism. Sovereignty. In the Celtic worldview, Ireland was not a possession. It was a being. Female. Conscious. Alive. Seen through the lens of sovereignty, the Banshee's cry changes shape entirely. It is no longer a woman screaming at death. It is a queen announcing abdication. When she wails for the death of an O'Neill or an O'Connor, she is not indulging in grief. She is performing a political act. A ritual declaration that the sacred marriage between ruler and land has been severed. The king is dead. And the land is widowed. This scream is not emotional excess. It is constitutional collapse. In ancient Ireland, the death of a rightful ruler did not simply remove a man from power. It plunged the territory into a dangerous state of interregnum, a liminal interval where protection was withdrawn, fertility faltered, and chaos crept in through the cracks. The Banshee's cry announces that condition. She is not warning the family. She is warning the land itself. The throne is empty. The covenant is broken. Until a new union is formed, the soil is exposed. In this framework, the Banshee is not a messenger of death. She is the dethroned bride. The sovereignty goddess stripped of her partner, forced into mourning not just a man, but an entire political order. Her scream ripples outward as a destabilizing force. Crops fail. Herds weaken. Fortune collapses. The cry marks the beginning of the wasteland. The mythology of the loathsome lady confirms this reading with brutal clarity. In the legend of Neil of the Nine Hostages, a group of brothers hunting in the wilderness encounter a hideous crone guarding a well. Her skin is decayed. Her body repulsive. Her presence unbearable. She demands a kiss. Only Neil steps forward. Only he embraces the horror. And in that moment, she transforms. She becomes radiant. Beautiful. Overwhelming in her authority. She reveals herself as the sovereignty of Ireland and declares his destiny. King and chieftain shalt thou be. The lesson is explicit. The hag and the goddess are the same being. Ugliness and beauty are seasonal masks. Winter and summer. Decay and fertility. Rule and mourning. This is why the Banshee's appearance fractures in later folklore. The withered hag of the mist is the goddess in winter, the land without a king, grieving, unclaimed. The beautiful maiden is the land in summer, fertile, united, protected. To see her washing bloody clothes at the ford is to witness sovereignty in ruin. The land has lost its partner. The ugliness is diagnostic. Her body becomes a political barometer. She withers when leadership fails. She weeps when legitimacy dies. Her horror is not random. It is proportional. The worse the ruler, the more monstrous the goddess appears. This explains why the Banshee attaches herself so precisely to aristocratic bloodlines. The O and the Mac families are not random victims of haunting. They claim descent from the high kings who once participated in these sacred marriages. Their DNA carries the ghost of authority. The contract may be forgotten by humans, but the land remembers. She follows the O'Neill not because he is virtuous, but because his blood still holds title deeds to a province that no longer exists. She is not sentimental. She is administrative. A spectral bureaucrat tracking succession in a monarchy that officially died in the 17th century, but never dissolved in the memory of the earth. Through this lens, even the ritual of keening changes meaning. In ancient thought, the health of the king and the fertility of the land were inseparable. A righteous ruler meant abundance. A false or dead king meant famine. The Banshee's wail is therefore an ecological alarm. It signals the onset of sterility. The fields will suffer. The herds will thin. The balance is broken. Her grief is not only for the man in the bed, but for the crops that will fail and the children who will starve in his absence. She mourns the collapse of order itself. This also explains her absolute silence toward usurpers. The Viking, the Norman, the English settler. Under the laws of sovereignty, a ruler must be chosen by the goddess. A conqueror who takes land by force without ritual union is not a king. He is a violator, a rapist of territory. And the land rejects him. The Banshee does not cry for his death because no marriage existed to dissolve. Her silence is not indifference. It is resistance. By withholding her scream, she denies the invader legitimacy. She refuses him entry into sacred history. He dies unmarked, unacknowledged, treated as a temporary infection rather than a husband of the soil. This elevates the Banshee beyond folklore. She becomes a symbol of national identity. The unconquerable soul of Ireland itself. Castles may burn. Languages may be outlawed. Laws may be erased. But the woman in the mound remains. Generation after generation, she appears to remind the scattered descendants of the clans that the marriage vow still exists, binding them to the land beyond defeat, beyond empire, beyond time. And when we strip away the last layers of sanitization, when we abandon the Victorian ghost entirely, we see her true face emerge. Her behaviors align perfectly with one ancient figure, the Morrigan, the triple goddess of war and fate. Specifically, her aspect is Badb, the battle crow. In the pre-Christian sagas, she did not fight with blades. She fought with terror, with prophecy, with screams that broke morale before swords ever touched. She appeared before battles washing armor, hovering over fields, screaming names into the wind. The Banshee is not her descendant. She is her survivor. A goddess reduced to a warning system. A queen demoted to a scream. But still capable of collapsing hearts, bloodlines, and kingdoms. With sound alone. She does not need to kill. She tells you that killing has already been decided. And that knowledge is the most terrifying weapon of all. Before the scream haunted cottages. Before it clung to windows and chimneys. Before it became sorrow. It was terror. On ancient battlefields she did not weep. She hovered. High above the clash of iron and bone, she took the form of a hooded crow or a screaming hag, drifting on the smoke of burning shields. Her voice cut through the din like a blade dragged across stone. It did not inspire fear. It manufactured it. Veterans broke ranks when they heard her. Men who had survived campaigns collapsed screaming, their hearts giving out before a spear ever found them. Whole formations dissolved, not because they were outmatched, but because the sound convinced them the future had already ended. This scream had a name. The Badb Catha. The battle cry. A sonic weapon. Its function was precise: to announce the doom of a king and fracture the morale of those foolish enough to stand beside him. She did not kill directly. She told the truth too early. And the truth destroyed them. Over centuries of oral transmission, something softened. Gods became stories. Stories became whispers. Whispers became warnings. The battle scream lost its edge and became the mourning wail. The goddess who caused death through terror evolved into a spirit who mourned death through sorrow. But the mechanism never changed. A supernatural female voice. Breaking silence. To announce the end of a life. The Banshee is not a different being. She is the same force. Seen through the lens of defeat. She is the war goddess disarmed. Her sword taken. Her battlefield stripped away. Left with only her voice. And voice, as it turns out, was always enough. The strongest forensic evidence of this lineage is not textual. It is avian. In rural counties, even into the modern era, the Banshee is still called by the old name. The Badb. She appears as a crow perched on a windowsill, a black bird hunched on a chimney, watching. Silent. Waiting. This bird is not random. It is a scavenger. A feeder on the dead. The battlefield crow. The totem of the war goddess herself. By appearing as a crow, the Banshee signals her original role. She has come not only to warn, but to claim. She marks the body for the earth. She arrives to take her portion of the harvest. Just as she once did when warriors fell screaming into the mud. This connection becomes undeniable when we examine the most famous death in Irish mythology. The hero Cuchulainn. At the end of his saga, she does not confront him as a warrior. She does not challenge him. She appears as a washerwoman. At the ford. Scrubbing his bloody armor before he has even worn it for the last time. This single image is the ignition point of the entire washerwoman tradition. Every account told by a Scottish crofter or an Irish farmer centuries later, every midnight river, every bloody tunic, is an unknowing echo of this moment. They forgot the hero. They forgot the name. But they remembered the woman at the river. The washerwoman is not inspired by the Banshee. The Banshee is not inspired by the washerwoman. Both are degraded survivals of the same goddess. Waiting for the hero to die. This genealogy also explains the aristocratic bias that haunted the folklore. The war goddess did not concern herself with farmers. She did not scream for shepherds. She dealt in heroic death. Kings. Champions. Warriors whose fall altered the balance of the land. When her myth collapsed into folklore, the preference remained. She continued to haunt the O'Neill and the O'Briens because they were the descendants of the warrior caste she once commanded. Her exclusivity is not cruelty. It is jurisdiction. The shift from red washer to white lady marks the final stage of sanitization. Christianity could not erase her. So it repainted her. The blood-soaked goddess of battlefields was bleached into a pale, grieving ghost. Her red garments, the color of blood, earth, and sovereignty were washed into white shrouds. Her scream of triumph became a scream of loss. But folklore never finished the job. The red eyes remained. The silver comb remained. The anger remained. Beneath the white cloth, the goddess still breathed. Her instability of form, so confusing to archivists, suddenly makes sense. Witnesses in the 20th century described her as a bird. Others as a rabbit. A weasel. A woman. This is not contradiction. It is inheritance. The war goddess was a shapeshifter. She attacked heroes as eel, wolf, and heifer. She flowed between forms because she was not bound to flesh. The Banshee's instability is not folkloric corruption. It is divine residue. What survives in the modern scream is not just grief. It is authority. A sound that once emptied battlefields. A voice that once crowned kings by unmaking them. The Banshee does not merely announce death. She announces that the story is finished. And no amount of disbelief, no century, no empire, has ever managed to silence her completely. She is not fixed. She is fluid. She wears whatever skin the moment requires, crow, hag, maiden, washer, shadow, because her purpose is not to appear, but to communicate. Mortality demands translation. And she is fluent in every dialect of fear. To finally identify the Banshee as the Badb, to recognize her as the degraded survival of a war goddess, is not to make her smaller. It restores her dignity. She is not a demon. Not a damned soul. Not a mistake. She is a function. In the pagan worldview, death was not an accident. It was a process. A dangerous transition that required management. Someone had to cut the thread. Someone had to choose the slain. Someone had to wash the blood and open the gate. Death was once a woman. A dark-cloaked administrator standing at the edge of the world, managing the passage between states of being. The Banshee is the memory of that system. She does not scream because she is sad. She screams because something enormous has shifted. A gate has opened. And the energy of that opening fractures the silence of the human world like glass under pressure. As her divine role diminished, so too did her human mirror. The decline of the Banshee in Irish consciousness runs parallel to the suppression of the keening woman. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the Catholic hierarchy waged a quiet but relentless war against keening. The wake, with its drink, its games, its uncontrolled emotion, was viewed as a dangerous pagan survival. To the Church, the keening woman was not a healer. She was competition. She presided over chaos. She commanded attention. She could whip a room into ecstasy or despair with sound alone. That power threatened control. This hostility hardened into law. By the mid-17th century, decrees issued at ecclesiastical synods explicitly banned professional mourners. Families were fined. Priests withheld funeral rites. In some parishes, the presence of a keening woman meant no mass. The wild ancestral cry was replaced with the quiet repetition of the rosary. This substitution was not accidental. The keen directed grief outward, into the community, the land, the past. The rosary directed it upward, towards silence. Then came the famine. And the scream broke. The sheer scale of death shattered the machinery of the traditional wake. Entire villages collapsed. The social networks that sustained keening dissolved into starvation and flight. In the post-famine years, a new Ireland emerged, desperate to appear modern, respectable, clean. The rising Catholic middle class rejected the keen as backward. Silence became status. To bury the dead quietly meant you had escaped the bog. To scream meant you had not. And as the human voices fell silent, the supernatural one faded with them. The Banshee had always mirrored the living. When the king died, she lost her habitat. Modernization finished the work. Electric lights erased the dark. Drained wetlands erased the ford. Radios and televisions filled the silence with noise. She did not vanish. She withdrew. Back into the mound. Drowned out by the 20th century. Anthropologists argue that something vital was lost. The keen was not merely noise. It was a communal technology for grief. Its removal privatized trauma, locking mourning behind doors and inside chests. The fear did not disappear. It was internalized. The Banshee faded because we stopped listening, not because death became less terrifying, but because we no longer shared the terror. And so, in the final analysis, the Banshee is far more than a ghost story. She is one of the oldest memories Ireland possesses. We have followed her from Iron Age battlefields, where she flew screaming above the slain, to medieval fords, where she washed the armor of kings, to 19th century cottages, where she pressed her face to the glass and cried into the night. Through every transformation, one function remained intact. She forced the community to acknowledge death, not as failure, not as inconvenience, but as a cosmic event. A rupture important enough to require a divine witness. The terror she inspired was a paradox, because within the fear was validation. To be haunted by the Banshee meant you belong, that your life mattered enough for the land itself to respond. Her cry confirmed that the dead were woven into something ancient, held in the memory of soil and stone. In a world that reduces death to paperwork and hospital rooms, the Banshee offered a harsher, but deeper, truth. Death is not quiet. It is not small. It is loud enough to wake the gods. And her scream, that terrible, unforgettable sound, was the ultimate compliment paid by the otherworld to a mortal soul. Today, the mounds of the sea stand quiet. Grass grows thick over stone older than language. The chambers beneath lie sealed. The rivers flow without witnesses. And the professional keeners, those women who once carried the grief of entire villages in their throats, have gone to their own graves, unaccompanied by the wild music they once commanded. The world is quieter now. Too quiet. But silence is not absence. It is compression. What no longer has permission to scream sinks inward, into the subconscious, into dreams, into stories told half-jokingly and never finished. The archetype did not die. It retreated. The Banshee endures not as a figure on the hill, but as a pressure behind the ribs. As the sudden certainty that accompanies loss before words arrive. As the instinctive knowledge that some grief cannot be carried by one body alone. She is the personification of sorrow that exceeds human capacity. She reminds us of something modern life works tirelessly to deny. That grief is not pathological. That mourning is not weakness. That love does not end at the edge of the grave. Some losses are so profound that they cannot remain private. They spill outward. Into weather. Into land. Into sound. In the old world, when someone died, the earth responded. The wind answered. The stones remembered. The river carried the news. The Banshee was the voice of that response. She was never there to frighten children. She was there to ensure that no life ended unnoticed. Strip away the superstition, and what remains is not fear, but recognition. The scream exists because love exists. The depth of the cry measures the depth of the bond. She is the shadow that proves the light. She is the scream that proves the love.